Hi everybody, it's Jackie Smurden in Dunnock Studio here on a rainy day in Norfolk. I live in the heart of Norfolk and I like sharing my art tips and tricks, art with a heart. So I hope you enjoy some of the information I pass on to you today. I wanted to talk a little bit more about getting started, and I'm going to focus on watercolour, as for me that's what most people have a dabble at if they've never painted before, and it's easy to pop it out onto your kitchen table, worktop, and pop it away again, unlike some other mediums. So that's what we're going to have a look at now, and I'll talk you through some of the basic equipment that you would need to start and how you can get by with very little in the way of purchases. We'll just go through that now. So in front of me here I have got some basic equipment that you would need to paint in watercolours. Now, first thing to say is it's watercolour for a reason, so most important thing is water. But you will see I have two separate pots of it. A larger one, this used to have popcorn in it, and a smaller one, that used to be a chocolate pot. I also have a spray bottle, which is quite useful for a lot of things in watercolour. So I do recommend one of those, but you don't have to purchase one. You could literally use any diffuser spray from a household item once you've finished it, provided you clean it out. We also have some paints, which we'll talk about. Kitchen roll is always useful, and we have some brushes, and pencil. Pencil is for drawing and sketching your picture, but you do not need to be able to draw, so do not let that put you off splashing some paint around. So we'll put that out of the way. Paper. One of the most important things if you're painting is the paper you use. So we'll go through these in a little bit more detail, but first of all, I've got some paints, I've got some water, I've got some paper, but I could use some of this here. But how am I going to mix colours up? Well, you can get a bigger palette like this one, some of which of the wells I've cleaned. But if you really are starting out, nothing beats a white plate. So there's one that was used earlier in one of my classes. Any white plate from a charity shop or a spare one you've got laying around or something that's chipped, white plates are absolutely fabulous for painting, and they're cheap and cheerful if you use second-hand versions. You do not need to spend money on a mixing palette if you do not want to. But this one is what I use on my workshops. It's a little folding palette. It's quite useful to have. It's not expensive. All this bit is, if you just wanted to, go outside and paint and hold it, it's a thumb hole, but you do not need to use that. So obviously these wells you can mix colours in, and I'll do that today. You may have bought some paints that came like this, and these are pans, these little square boxes, and you obviously got a mixing area here. So there's not as much mixing space as you can see in the comparison of the two, and there's even more if you do the plate idea. So it's up to you, personal preference. If you want to splash out, or somebody's given you a little travel set like this, very nice. Make sure you get maximum use out of it. But you can just start off, if you want, with a little pan of paints like this. You wouldn't need necessarily many. Or tube paints, and that's what I use because I get through a lot of paint. So what I do is squeeze the tubes into these wells, and essentially they dry out. You don't get rid of them when you finish painting, they dry out. So the paint that's in there after the tube, which is wet paint in here, it's squidgy, that paint ends up the same as these pans, which is dry. It's put in there and it's dried. So the same applies for both types of tube paint that's dried out, or pans that are already dry is you have to wake the paint up. So I'm going to put that travel one out of the way. And this is where I use a system of clean water and a pipette. Now pipettes are not essential. Again, you can use anything from a dropper out of a food bottle, of anything you've got a dropper in you can use. You can also buy these craft stores, etc. This is just how I do it. You do not have to do this. You can use your brush, but you'll see why I do this. This is the clean water, and to wake my paints up I drop clean water onto some of the paints like this. Let's have some yellow as well. You need to give that a little bit of time. If you have got a spray bottle, that also does the same job. So we'll just spray some of the other ones down here, and you just need to give it some time to start to work its magic. So if you finished a painting session and your paint is drying out on a palette or on a plate, doesn't matter. Next time you come to paint, you wake them up, which is what I'm doing now. So you spray some water or drop some water, and then you could use your brush as well if you wanted to do that and you hadn't got either a spray bottle or pipette. So just damp your brush and drop the paint in. If you can, try not to put your brush into the paints because you start mixing paints before you actually want to. So that's another way of doing it. Use your brush. Okay. Now going to talk about brushes. I've got 3 brushes here. They're different brands, they're different qualities. Now all of these, if I read them off, have got a different size on them, but as you can see they're all very similar in size. So do not worry about sizes, do not worry about the actual brand. It's a personal preference. Now a single manufacturer will actually have different size brushes across their ranges with the same number. So having a number on a brush does not guarantee it's the same size as another brush with the same number. So it's really good to know that, because you get bogged down in I must have this brush on this size, but if you go to a different range it will be a different size. So try to go somewhere where you can pick the brushes up. Pick your first brush that's slightly bigger than you feel comfortable, but not too big. You do not want a small brush because you will fiddle with the details, and you want to just start watercolour by being loose. And all these brushes look quite fluffy and soft, so you think, well, there's not really, how am I going to get detail with a big brush like that? Once you've dampened the brush, you squeeze out the point on the end. If you can see that, it will go to a very sharp point, and these are round brushes, they're known as rounds, and that's why I tend to use them, because you can do an awful lot with this one brush. You only need one, you don't need any different sizes to start with, just one brush. If you don't know what you're looking for and you haven't got much in the way of funding, just try and choose a brush that has soft bristles. I'll show you an alternative. Here's a nylon stiff bristle brush. Now that is not as good for holding water, because the water, there's nothing much to hold it, whereas soft bristles that are designed to hold water, and they usually have this belly shape, so the paint sits in here and then it releases down the brush according to the pressure. So this is another brand. This is one of my favourite little brushes. So it just looks slightly different the way it's put together, but essentially there's that shape, there's a belly and then a point. So that's my recommendation, is find yourself a nice round brush with a pointy end that you feel comfortable with, and don't go too small to start with, but it has to be comfortable for you. It's no good me saying get a big brush and you really feel out of your depth. Get the size that works for you, but really the numbers don't go there. The numbers are all different on all ranges, even within the same manufacturer. So there we go, we've got some paints which are busy waking up here. So paper, all the things that I would recommend you do look at spending your money on it is the paper. It's no good having fabulous paints, wonderful brushes, if your paper isn't up to the job, because your paper is the most important thing in your kit. All these paints do wonderful things when you mix them with water and put them on paper, but the paper has to be correct. It has to be watercolour paper. So the best thing to do is to buy a branded watercolour paper. There's lots of different surfaces to think about, but that's another video. Just go and pick something that is branded and in your area and is for watercolour. And don't worry, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Just because something's branded and actually is watercolour paper doesn't make it very expensive, but it's certainly going to be cheaper than a craft shop sketch pad, for instance, which just isn't up to the job. When you're learning, you need something decent that will make you feel like, oh yes, I can see some effects happening here. So all this one is a manufacturer has used decent paper. It's quite thick. You can see that there. It's not very thin, and they've made it into a notepad, so you can hear it there. So this is a really good, nice thick paper that will do nice things when you add paint and water. So I'm going to pick one of these brushes, and I'm going to go for the basic craft brush. So this is not a branded watercolour brush, it's an old craft brush that's lurked into my kit somewhere, and we'll see what we can do. So going back to the palette here, so remember I've added some water to these wells, and now I'm going to put some water in the palette, about half a pipette full, depends on the paint. So now my brush is going into this one, and I'm trying not to put my brush into the small clean one. So I'm going to pick up some blue, because the blue is the nice colour for you to see. So you want different consistencies of paint. Start from tea, coffee, and milky coffee, single cream, double cream, and then thick paint straight off the tube paint like that. That's, we call it Marmite or honey, whatever analogy works for you. So I'm going to put the point of my brush here down and draw back. There's a fairly thin line. Put more pressure on and you get a much wider line. Go right to the end. And you may or may not be able to see there's already patterning appearing here in that blue, because blue is known to create all sorts of wonderful things. Again, a subject of another video. So there's a fairly thin line and there's a really wide line just from that one very inexpensive craft brush. Don't even know where it came from. So now I've got blue on my brush. If I dip it straight into another colour, I'm going to put blue into the other colour, which is not for me. Try and be clean if you can, but don't worry if you do, it will work itself out. So clean your brush in between your colours. I'm going to pick up some crimson. You'll soon learn that red is the strongest in your palette, so if you add some red, add it very carefully. So let's see what sort of colour we get there. So it's like a, not quite violet, still a little bit on the blue side. So again, washing my brush, pick up some more crimson. There we go. So now, because I didn't squeeze my brush out, this paint has now gone a little bit more watery. This is more like tea. So let's see what this does. So nice thin line. You can see the difference. It's not quite as strong as that. In fact, it's very pale. Now, watercolour always dries much lighter. So you can hardly see that now. It's going to get even worse. So the next time I add pigment, I'm going to squeeze my brush so there's no more water going in. Pick up a lot of the blue, quite strong. There we go, that's better. Clean my brush, squeeze my brush, pick up the crimson. Be careful, it's strong. There we go, and then pull that along. Push down. Look at the difference in that colour. So as you get towards the end of the line, you see it gets paler because the pigment is coming off the brush onto the paper. So this is called swatching. This is playing really. So I'm just doing long lines. You can do any shape you like. So if you haven't already got your paints out, now is the time to go and get them and just swatch along with me. So I'm now picking up some of the green. I've already mixed green in this well before, so that's fine. I can add green back in here. And let's see what this one does. If your brush isn't looking like it's got a nice point, just roll it in the palette like that. There you go, nice light touch and then a bit more pressure. There we go. So if you go back over a colour like this and add it in again, you can get away with it while the paint's still wet, but you will find that you lose some of the real delicate patterns that watercolour does if you leave it alone. So I'm just showing you, you can pop it back in, but already the edge of that line I put in previously has dried, so I've now got some rough edges to that line, so it's not as good as leaving it completely alone. So I need another little bit of water. So you soon, by doing this, you learn how much paint to pick up, how much water to add to it. There's no right or wrong here. You're not going to get anything wrong. Just have a play with what paints you've got. Doesn't matter if they're the cheapest paints ever. If you've got them, just get them out and play with them, because you'll soon get to know them. And then when you've done that, you'll know whether or not you want to carry on with that painting idea that you had. Therefore, you can then go and buy slightly better quality paints, but equally, when you buy them, you know which colours you like. So I've just added more pigment here, because you can see this one completely ran out. So let's try that again. Bearing in mind this is a craft brush, it's not specifically for watercolour, slightly better. Can you see this one is dried here before it even got onto the end of the line? So I've got a harsh line there. This one is looking better. You could, if you wanted to, tilt your paper and you get some movement going down there. But this is just fun, this is practicing. So I'm now going to put my craft brush away. Let's see if we get any difference using a brush that's specifically designed for watercolour. So I'm going to mix up a little bit more of that paint. Pick it up with a brush, clean brush, pop it in. You just need to make sure there's enough pigment in there. This is sort of coffee consistency. Right, slightly bigger brush. Let's see how much longer. Now I'm using a watercolour brush now. So although it still runs out towards the end of the line, it goes a lot further than the cheaper craft brush. Okay. Let's pick up another colour. So let's have something nice and bright. You'll soon find out by doing this what colours do what and how much you need to put in. And it's one of those things, until you do it, you don't know. It's very well me telling you this, but when you start doing it, it will sink in, you'll understand it. But this is just playing. So I'm carrying on with my lines. I could be doing circles. It's nice to do pebble shapes actually. So let me just clear. So now I've filled all the wells up here, run out of space. So your trusty towel, let's clean one of the wells out. Like so. Pop a bit of water in. Now I'm going to pick up, make sure my brush is clean, yep. Pick up some of this one. Now this is, as you can see, a bluey green. Some colours are much harder to mix yourself than others, and this is, by doing this you learn which colours you like. Therefore when you go and buy some better quality paints in the future, you can pick the colours you like that you're going to use, rather than buying colours you might never touch. Oh, look at that one, beautiful, absolutely lovely colour that is. So we do one more. Which one shall we have this time? Let's have something really dark. Now, sometimes what you've got in a palette from previous times is actually, you don't know what it is. So the best way to find out what something is to do what we're doing here, is to wet your paint, wake it up, and then do some swatching. And it's pretty obvious already that this is black. Black? Black in painting? Never. Oh yes, lots of people use black. And lots of the old masters use black. So don't let that put you off. But again, another subject for another day. So there we go, we've done some swatching. I've rinsed my brush out. Now, can you see, squeeze the water out, can you see how mucky this is? So if we hadn't have used a separate bucket to wash the brushes, some of this muddy colour, because all the colours mixed together make mud, some of that would now be in my paints here, and that's why I keep a separate pot so that I'm not adding water from a dirty pot into my palette. So that's just a tip from me. The last tip is I've just put my brushes down here, and I've done this bright red, rolls off across the table, falls on your lap, and then you're covered in paint, or your floor's covered in paint. So here's a nifty tip, egg box. So you've got muck on your paintbrush, you want to put it down because the phone's just rung, the doorbell's gone. Rest your brushes in an egg box. All the drips will fall in here and they can't go anywhere, they're not going to fall off. That's a really good nifty tip. So there's some ideas to get you started. If you've got any questions, then please do ask in the comments below. And if you've got any ideas for future videos, I'd love to hear them. So I hope that's helped you to maybe get started with some watercolours. If you've got some paints and you don't think they're very good quality, please don't worry, just get them out and paint with them. Some people who've painted with very cheap paints have actually created amazing pictures, because it's way better to have the paints and get them out and play with them than it is to think, they're not very good paints, I need to wait until I can afford better ones. No, you don't. Just get them out and have a play. Go back to playing with things, play with the paints. And all I've done here is swatch out. You can see the differences using the better brush at the bottom to the one at the top. So play with what equipment you've got, have a play around with how you sort your water out, and at this point I'd be emptying this and clean water in there so it doesn't get any muckier than it is. So that dirty water pot needs to be emptied. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. Happy painting, and I'll see you all on the next video. Bye for now.